No accountant is ever going to be upset with an AE for not understanding how to run a specific report. Never going to be a not. But if you try and answer it, or you try and like twist it some other way and you don't know what you're talking about and the value, the questions to ask, that's where you're going to start to lose some of that trust, and that will impact you negatively.
Everyone wants to build stronger pipeline, but only a few know how to make it happen. If you're listening to this show, you know outbound is not dead. You just need a little help building a system that actually works. Well, you're in the right place. I'm Todd Busler, and on this show, we're breaking down the plays, processes, and frameworks behind repeatable pipeline growth, straight from the people who built it. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, my guest today is Em Daigle. She started her career as an accountant, very rare for people in sales leadership. But with that deep understanding, she eventually joined an accounting software firm that was later acquired by category leader Zuora. In this episode, she explains why her non-traditional background was a benefit, not a ding, and how that helped her lead and build large, successful go-to-market teams. Recently, she started her own company, and she explains the logic behind it, what's been happening in sales, and why she's excited about the next couple years. Enjoy. Em, what's up? Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do this.
I'm really excited to have you. We met probably 3 years ago when we were really just getting Champify off the ground. And I think you were an early believer in what we were doing, which was awesome. And now knowing what I know about Zuora and that sales motion, I think it makes a ton of sense. They've been a super successful customer. But the reason why I'm excited to have you on is your background is fascinating. Started in accounting, very operational heavy, built a bunch of sales teams, now doing this automation AI trend. Explain your background to the audience, specifically your journey, how that transitioned to Zuora, what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely a little non-traditional, especially for starting out. Way back when it was the big five accounting firms, started in public accounting. So I'm an accountant at heart, spent a number of years doing that, both in public and in industry. So went through and have the basis understanding of accounting and business. And about the time that SaaS and subscription was really, well, I wouldn't say new. It was always kind of there. The concept was there, but as companies were kind of like figuring out how to use it as a true go-to-market motion, I decided to start my own consulting business where I was helping to advise companies in how they could actually account for that, because ERPs weren't working. So like, what else could they do? So either I was building some crazy spreadsheet for them or trying to find some automation tool. Came across RevPro, which then was acquired by Zuora. And so at that time, I was talking with the Zuora folks and went over there to try and help crack this code on really how to sell to accountants, because being an accountant, I can say this, but a little introverted, definitely risk averse. So it's tough to really like do some outbounding there. And we did that. Of course, you guys at Champify helped us with that smaller community, trying to track where everybody was going, and it's hugely helpful. Loved doing that, did a little over 6 years, ended up going to Clarity, which is like a document AI company, doing something very similar. So running all things sales, marketing, and partners, trying to figure out that go-to-market motion to help accountants. Loved doing it with both of those companies, felt really passionate about automation for accountants. And so rather than working with one particular vendor, I took the opportunity to pursue this. I'll say it's been a passion project for a while, but decided to launch OTTO-MATES, which pulls together accounting and finance professionals and also the vendors and service providers in the space that can really help them up-level what they're doing, but in a way that is trusted, safe, transparent, not salesy at all, but allow everybody the chance to explore and create some relationships, which, as you know, it's those longer-term relationships, and as people move, can be really beneficial, because I don't think there's a perfect tech stack at any point in time. I think there's sort of like the right solution for the right problem at the right place at the right time. And that changes if you're in the same company or if you jump to a new company and now your challenges look a little different. So that's exactly why, I think Champify is so huge to be able to help in that way, to be able to come back and help connect everybody on the back end when they do come across a problem that they want to solve.
So much to dig into here, but I want to first say I love the name of the new company. I think it's super clever and catchy. And secondly, I think you're ahead of a trend that we're going to continue to see, which is a lot of industry experts, people with real deep industry chops, starting to be the quote unquote enterprise salespeople that are actually trusted advisors. And I think as AI makes a lot of the how do I get in touch with people and how do I actually do a lot of the sales process? Like people are going to want that. And I think like you were very early on that trend, which is interesting. How did you make the first jump into kind of go to market? Because I look at your background now and it's like, look, I've built big sales teams. I figured out how to crack big accounts. I'm sure you've been a part of massive expansion deals. Like how'd you originally go from accounting professional to now like go to market expert?
Yeah, so I think having the basis of that finance and accounting background is hugely helpful. Like I had spent so many years helping to operationalize a lot of that stuff that is the back office. And so I had kind of a front row seat in helping the teams do that. And I saw where it worked really well. And when the go-to-market team works well with the finance team, everything just happens a lot more smoothly. But I think my opportunity at Zora to really kind of like break in and have the opportunity to be a little bit creative with how we did that helped me to get deeper and deeper into the go-to-market side, working with a marketing team that was, we were trying different things. We were iterating on campaigns. We were trying to amplify. It's so easy for me to just pull you guys in because it was those types of things that maybe felt a little out of the box at the time, but we needed to think of a new way to do that to help sell to accountants. And then I just got deeper and deeper, ended up building out sales teams, ended up creating those partnerships with alliances teams because you need that, right? To be able to pull it all together, especially to create those trusted relationships with the accountant. So it was organic, but by mistake.
Interesting. Talk to me about the biggest changes, from when you first got there, what seemed like, hey, let's take some good industry chops and relationships and a different way of selling to this audience to, that's a big scale team, went through an IPO, went through a bunch of different investors. Like, what was the biggest either changes or like step function improvements that you either led or were a part of in that go-to-market journey over those 6 years?
So I think one thing that Zora does really well is takes a look at who they're selling to and takes a step back and like, okay, how well is this working? And if it's not, let's fix it. Like thinking about the messaging, thinking about the ways in which the internal teams are set up. I'll give you two examples of that.
Yeah.
One, on the former, the messaging, and I will fall on the sword for this one. It's not a story that I'm proud to tell, but I think it's a really good learning because it doesn't show me in the best light. But, when I went there, I was a few years in, so a little bit stepped away from the accounting world, hands on keyboard. And I really thought that if we did a campaign around IPO and like IPO readiness, that was going to be the thing that would hit. It would be the compelling event for people to have conversations with us. Well, turns out it was a huge flop. People don't actually want to spend money to get ready to go an IPO and then go through a whole implementation and then get their teams up to speed, only to then go through the due diligence. So huge fail on my part. However, we realized that was a fail, and then we could quickly change and iterate on different messages, try to find those compelling events. But what we did that through interviews with buyers, whether they bought from us or not. So we had some customers that decided to buy from Zora. We also went out and people who walked away from us and chose a different solution, we went and interviewed them too. And like what hit, what didn't, all of those things. So really trying to understand who the buyer is. On the other example that I gave you around like the internal structure of the organization, so we tried a bunch of different things over the years when I was at Zora, and some of them were focused on industry. So like having teams focused by industry. Some were focused by product. So we tried different things, but I think that allowed us to really like make sure we were aligned with the buyers and allowed us to, again, that iteration to be able to say like, okay, this particular setup didn't work, but why didn't it work? And then try and figure out what we were going to do differently. So by the time I left, I had the benefit and honor of being the general manager for the Zora revenue side of the business. I was on the go-to-market side, and then I had a counterpart on the product side. So he was the GM on the product side. Karthik Ramamurthy, he was actually one of the co-founders of RevPro back in the day before it got acquired, which is awesome. But he and I could team up as both go-to-market and product and be able to come up with the different types of campaigns, the different types of motions, where we wanted to put our marketing investments, and how we wanted to enable sales teams to sell, because we had that tie-in for the Zora revenue product, which was like really, really exciting. Learned so much in that year. That was drinking from a fire hose, but gosh, in all the best ways.
3 good learnings there for everyone listening. If you didn't catch that, first, what I heard was just experimentation and iteration. I have more campaigns that I've helped organize that I would bet my house on that have flopped, but you learn quickly and you say, okay, here's what we're going to do differently. Yep. Staying really close to the customer from a win-loss analysis standpoint and deeply understanding. I've heard this from working with Zora over the last couple of years, just really close to what was happening in the business to kick off an evaluation. Not to mention why did we win or lose and what could we have done differently, but what is the changes that is leading to, hey, we're ready to finally look at this thing.
Exactly. Yep.
And then the third part I think is actually becoming more popular too, which is like these pod-oriented structures or like business units where product and go-to-market's really close, especially for an enterprise type of sale, because the products are moving and changing way faster, and B, you can't just have go-to-market on an island. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah. I think that alignment is super important and critical, because when you have everybody speaking the same language, everybody tied into what the objectives and goals are, I feel like there's a lot more motivation behind it. But then also just like the alignment makes everybody's day-to-day work so much better. And then you get those results on the back end.
What was it like, leaving Zora, public company at the time, very mature business, kind of category leader in different areas of what they covered, to going to a much smaller, less known company? How did you approach go-to-market there? What were some of the learnings? Where do you think you made some mistakes that are relevant for other people? Because, a lot of the people listening here have spent time at bigger companies going smaller, and it's very different.
Very different. So I mentioned the iteration at Zora that we had the, I'll say, luxury of doing. However, the pace of that iteration accelerated astronomically when I went over to Clarity. Much smaller team, as you mentioned, much more invested in like fail fast. I think without having that public company, I'll say, responsibility and delivering on certain things, your ability to experiment can be a little more creative, and there's a little bit more flexibility in what that looks like. I'm not suggesting that you should run wild with it, but certainly over there, I think Clarity wants to work fast. They want to see what's going to succeed and what fails, and if it fails fast, that's okay. You can move on to the next thing and see where something is successful. For example, at Clarity, the events are wildly successful. I think we took on it's kind of reminiscent of what I'm doing with OTTO-MATES, a community-focused approach to be able to create experiences for accountants that they might not typically have, and maybe do something outside of the box. So it's not your typical, I'm going to an accounting conference, I'm going to stand with a bunch of people that all have their suits on and they are at the ready with their notebooks. And instead it was, we had one of the summits at the MoMA in San Francisco. We had a launch of a new product at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. We had another summit, the first one in New York City at and I'm going to get it wrong. It was like Exotic Car Club, Luxury Car Club, something. I'm forgetting the exact name of the place. I'm not a car person. Apologies for anybody listening that is, but it was really cool. They had great cars there, but just like different experiences. And that really seemed to attract an audience that felt that community, which I think was like really like a smart move. And I've been tracking them online. It seems like they're continuing to do the same.
Did you try and fail, or did you/they try and fail with more traditional events? Because I think like the bar for getting someone to show up to an event is significantly higher, and like you have to be way more creative, or there has to be such a big reason for them to show up. So like, did you have to get that wrong first to be able to figure out like, hey, this is what a good event looks like?
Yeah, I can't take any credit for that because I think that team probably experienced that. So when I came in, it was like with the motion of, okay, let's figure out how we can leverage this sort of more, I'll say, experiential type of approach. The nice thing is we did have the ability to go out and try and find some stuff. Like we got real creative and we had like, I don't want to make us sound like we were booze hounds there, but like we did a tequila tasting. We did bourbon tasting, like all kinds of different drinks, but you could probably do sparkling water tastings. But it just happened to be, might be a little awkward, but it was really cool to be able to try those different things on different scales. I think one of our reps there even did like a pickleball tournament, which was like a very cool outside of the box type of thing to do and pulls a crowd. The nice thing is too, when you're doing something interesting, there's probably a lot less attrition for those events as opposed to like, the traditional dinners where you try and pull everybody together and then two people get stuck in traffic, you're already down 20% or whatever it might look like if you have an intimate dinner. So it gave us the ability to try some of those different things. And then we just kept growing. I mean, I was even there just shy of a year and we were growing our events and our summits exponentially at that point.
I want to dig into what it's like selling to accounting, right? Finance and accounting. I think, look, there's a bunch of huge companies that have been built selling to IT or the office of CIO or CTO or even the CMO, right? They're used to buying tech. They know how to evaluate tech. They have pretty set budgets. I think that's very different in accounting. And I think people underestimate some of that complexity. Like, why do you think there's unique challenges there or why it's uniquely challenging? And how did you help your teams break through?
Yeah, I think, again, I can preface saying all of these things about accountants because I am one at heart and was one for so many years. First and foremost is everyone's risk averse to an extent. However, when you are dealing with financial systems, financial records, all of those things that get audited, that have to follow certain controls, all of those things, the risk tolerance or the tolerance for risk goes down significantly. And they are at like high alert to make sure nothing's going to put any of those numbers at risk. So that right there is like your problem number one. I think the second thing is accountants tend to be creatures of habit. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I'm not saying that all have that approach, but a lot of times you're so busy month to month trying to do all of the different tasks, right? We're all being tasked to do more with less. Back office always feels that crunch because it's not necessarily a revenue generating department. So there's always that cost, I'll say, focus that's on those teams. So they're just trying to like stay alive, get their jobs done, do it as quickly as they can, but then on to the next. Whereas, if they had the luxury of stepping back and being like, okay, let me evaluate this process. How would I like to do this differently? A lot of times there's not that luxury of time to do that. So it's sort of like if somebody's calling them up and saying like, hey, we've got this solution that's going to make your life better. They're like, yeah, really? You think you know what I'm going through? Like you've not sat in my seat for 30 days. Try that first and then see how willing I am to answer that call or jump on a demo. And the cool thing is too with OTTO-MATES and the members that I have, some days I'll just like literally scroll through my member list and do the old like close my eyes and pick one. And I reach out and like, hey, would you be open to me just talking to you a little bit about just in general, like what's top of mind for you? How do you want to engage with some of these solutions? Like what does a good experience look like for you? And a lot of times they're like, I don't want to jump on a call. I don't want to have to like take a demo just so that I can see if it's even something that they're going to be able to solve for me. And then by the way, I'm going to get hit up every week for the next 18 months. Like, no thanks. And so instead they're like, I just want to know what some of these companies without like a lot of lift, like what is it that they do? How can they help me? And then what does it look like for an implementation? Like I don't want to have to go through 5 different hour-long meetings to figure out this thing is way more than I have budgeted for or is going to take 14 months to implement, whatever it is. I need something for 7K and I need it implemented tomorrow. Those are very different sales cycles, as you know, that can exhaust people. So I think there's something really interesting to just trying to figure out how these accountants actually want to buy because they're hungry for making things better, but it's really just, it gets back to understanding your buyer.
I get all of what you just said. If you're the new head of sales, new enterprise rep, new CRO that's selling to this audience or a similar audience, which I'd say like little less mature in terms of how they buy, typically like smaller budgets in terms of how they buy, very mission critical projects for sure. What is the right approach? Did you experiment with different offers or lunch and learns, or what did you do here and what advice do you have for folks?
The lunch and learns are huge. Accountants are always hungry to learn, like always. Need to be challenged, want to be thinking about ways that they can do things better. So lunch and learns, that educational approach, I think, is really a great way to start creating some trusted relationships, which gets me to the second thing. And I swear this isn't a pitch for OTTO-MATES, but it's going to sound like it. But it's why I actually really created OTTO-MATES is I believe that to sell to accountants, you need to be able to create trusted relationships. And that can't be done when you're going in there to try and point out that somebody has a compelling event. That compelling event needs to be the reason they come and talk to you, and they already trust you. They already understand. So I know that's not every go-to-market member's dream response, because that obviously means time. But I think there's a huge unlock there that if these accountants who, to your point, maybe aren't the most mature in the way of buying technology, don't have the time to invest, and really do value that trust because of the mission critical systems that you're touching, if you can create those relationships, leveraging partners, educating them, doing those types of things where it's providing value and not just asking for the call and not just asking for information, but understanding what their pain points are and not wasting their time if it's not a great fit. Because I will say this, if you can go in and effectively say to somebody, hey, this isn't the right solution for you right now, I guarantee they will remember that you saved them the time. It was a good experience, even though you didn't go and work with them. And then the next time they go either into a new role at their existing company or into a new role at a new company, they're going to come across a problem that either they will come back to you for, or it's such a small community of or ecosystem of accountants, their friends might be experiencing something where they do need you. And they're like, oh, I was just talking to X, Y, and Z. They weren't a great fit for me, but sounds like it's perfect for you. It's like a big reunion whenever we all get together, us accountants. We talk all the time. We're always sharing like what works and what doesn't. So I would advise these new CROs, these folks trying to crack the accounting code on how to sell to them, is really like establish those relationships now so that it's almost like pay it forward. You'll reap the benefits by doing that, because then the message in the market amongst all these accountants is going to be, oh, it was a great experience. They really do have my best interest at heart. They will recommend that to others, rather than the opposite, where if there's a negative experience, that's going to spread like wildfire, and you don't want that.
Yeah, the long game is very real. I think that's an awesome nugget you dropped around. People think about compelling events and, hey, we've had this opportunity. What's going to be the compelling event to actually get them to sign or get them started? But it's really on what's the compelling event to actually kick off some interest more than anything.
Yes, exactly. You can't create a compelling event for someone. It's either happening or it's not. So don't try and create something that's not there. Back to my IPO readiness example of the crash and burn. Not a great fit.
Talk to me, Em, about what you learned on the rep profile, because I'd imagine like you can get a very senior tenured rep that has been selling enterprise software for a while, and they get laughed out of the room because they don't know about rev rec and tax codes and all that other stuff. I would be one of them, right? So like, how did you, at your time at Zuora, like figure out what the right rep profile was? Where did you go wrong? What would you have maybe done differently there?
I love this question. I think first and foremost, curiosity is beyond critical, regardless of however seasoned that rep is, regardless of what huge logos they've closed. It comes down to curiosity, because you need to constantly be understanding what that individual is struggling with to be able to connect the value of what you can provide to them. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And I think that curiosity helps in picking up on the nomenclature so you don't get laughed out of the room. I remember standing and I was doing an enablement session for a number of our employees at Zuora, and I just got up on stage. I asked the question, who knows what it means to close the books? And one raised his hand and it was funny. He was, I can take a book, I can close it. I was like, oh, that's funny. That's not it. But then I started asking people, like, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? Not one person could really answer it in a way where I felt like, gosh, if I'm an accountant, you're coming in trying to pitch me that I can close my books faster, but you don't know what that means. I'm like, hold on, let's take a step back. So we started doing like RevRec 101 and literally, like, what does a day in the life of my buyer look like? And once those reps who are curious enough to understand what that really was, ask the second level questions, because we can give them a list of questions to go ask in a discovery call. If they don't understand what that answer is, how are they going to ask the next question? How are they going to be able to quantify what that pain looks like? And how are they going to be able to make that evaluation a valuable use of that person's time? So I think that curiosity is huge.
How did you weight that enablement track in terms of understanding the persona versus understanding the product versus understanding kind of the general landscape? How did you approach that? Because there's a lot happening there. And you're right, you had, and still have, a smaller list of target accounts that pay a lot of money, and like first impressions mean a lot. How did you approach it from an enablement perspective?
So I think product, you want to know what that looks like. You want to understand what it is that you're selling, obviously. However, I think the biggest piece is less on the capabilities, less on being able to answer every last question about, like, does your product do this? Does your product do that? Tell me about what the waterfall looks like. Like, you have solution consultants as your partners to be able to handle those types of questions. And it's always okay to be like, you know what? Great question. I don't know. Let me come back to you. In fact, on a very quick side note, I sometimes would fake that I didn't know things in calls. Yeah. And I'd be like, let me get back to you, because I just wanted a reason to be able to reach back out to them.
And it builds trust.
Totally.
Definitely.
So anyway, sorry, sidetrack. But
yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I'm always like, even when I was hiring people, I'm like, give one question that is an I don't know and give yourself a reason to reach back out. But I think the product piece, you do want to be familiar with it. You want to be able to speak intelligently, but understanding the value of what that product does is so important. And I think understanding how to link that to the pain points. So it's just really, truly understanding the value that is there, that you can connect those dots, because that's what really matters on a phone call when you don't have a solution consultant. No accountant is ever going to be upset with an AE for not understanding how to run a specific report. Never going to be a not. But if you try and answer it, or you try and like twist it some other way, and you don't know what you're talking about and the value, the questions to ask, that's where you're going to start to lose some of that trust, and that will impact you negatively.
That makes sense. Were there any big pieces of tech that helped you scale the pipe gen motion, or any specific trainings or enablement where you felt like, okay, when we rolled this out, here's something that had meaningful impact? And I'm sure you think a lot about like tooling and strategies in your new role, which we'll get to in a minute, but anything specific come to mind across Zora or Clarity?
Definitely the standard ones that I think everybody kind of is like either aware of and or has used, if not using currently, but certainly Salesforce, certainly HubSpot. The one that I also really didn't, that I actually got to know them at Zora and I didn't use at Clarity, we just weren't big enough, is similar, oddly, Clary. And that was really beneficial when we could use it for seeing what our pipeline, like what the history looked like, and figure out what was going on in the business at the time, so that we could replicate the things that were going particularly well, and then make sure we weren't repeating things that weren't going well. That tool, once we figured out how to use it, was really helpful. I tried to create at least a business process that we could use at Clarity to try and mimic that until we got to the point where it made sense to employ something like that, but we weren't big enough at the time. But Clary is a very slick tool for anybody who hasn't used it. I would highly recommend that tool.
Yeah, Clary's done an amazing job with really senior revenue execs.
Yeah.
I've heard many times quotes like, I will not work somewhere without Clary. And they built an awesome community around like CROs and boards, et cetera. You're not the first person I've heard say that.
Yeah.
What would you say the biggest challenges selling at a big kind of public company like Zora versus Clarity? Where were things the same? Where were the biggest differences?
So some of the things that were the same, I would say you've got similar buyers. So you're up against the same sort of pain points there, trying to drive attendance to events, trying to get people to answer emails, trying to like open up that funnel a little bit. I think I touched on this earlier, but the iteration at Zora was there, but slower. The iteration at Clarity was very fast. But conversely, at Zora, we had a lot more investment dollars to be able to put into our customer acquisition costs. Like we could try things that were a little more costly to see if they would work. Whereas, at a smaller company, they did do some great fundraising, but you also have to weigh a little bit more about where you want to put your investment dollars when you don't have as many of those dollars and as many customers and as much recurring revenue. So I think there's pros and cons to both for sure.
I want to transition. I think this has been awesome for selling to what I would say is like a more technical niche audience, right? And like really understanding the buyer. And I think you've dropped a ton of nuggets here that I've been taking some notes on. I think there's also this interesting track of like bigger company versus smaller company. Were there things at Clarity that maybe were considered norm or functional or working at Zora, such as, hey, we're going to have to do very deep discovery before we show the product? Like what big adjustments did you have to make to like traditional sales practices moving to a smaller company?
At Zora, we had reps that were so excited to show the product that we basically had to push them out of the room and be like, don't sign us up for a demo yet. Let's figure out what those pain points are. What is their challenge? Because Zora has so many great capabilities across billing and rev rec, and you can go far and wide with a discussion, and you can give them what I call the harbor tour of a demo. And so we tried to like really be intentional about what we showed so that it would connect with what they were ultimately challenged with the most, again, to drive that value message home. So we were constantly trying to push off the demo a little bit. Conversely, at Clarity, AI, everyone's like, okay, we know we need to do something with it. We like what you have, we think, but we don't really get it. So this was also about 18, 20 months ago. So it was even newer then as well. People know a lot more, but people were going through this, and this is accountants, but everybody. Everyone was going from like this skeptical stage to curious and then adopting. So we were kind of between this like skeptical and curious land where we actually had to do a bit more explaining of what Clarity actually did. Not necessarily that it wasn't a clear message, but like I think practitioners were just having trouble like, help me understand how AI works. Like, what is this thing? And so when we would talk about it and try and do the discovery, it was almost like too much. Like they didn't understand why we were asking questions, or they couldn't figure out exactly where we were trying to go. And so I feel like we weren't creating those trusted relationships in the beginning. But what we ended up doing is shifting our approach so that in that first call, all of our reps could actually give a high level demo. And we would encourage them to. So like get in, introduce yourself, a little bit about Clarity, a little bit about who you're talking to, and then just kind of like baseline set some understanding as to what we were even going to be talking about, like kind of showing the art of the possible so that the conversations and those discovery conversations that still had to happen were more informed on both sides. And I think with newer, more emerging technology, sometimes you have to do that. And so I think it's just being flexible in like what you're selling, who you're selling to, all of those things. There's no perfect way to run the sales cycle. It really does depend on what it is you're selling and who you're selling to.
Yeah. I think you see a lot of people that have come from more traditional, bigger brand companies that say like, no, we're not going to do this. That it's like, you have to. You're in a new space, new category. You have to train your buyers and educate the buyers on why you even should have the right to have a discovery conversation. I think a lot of people don't realize it. Em, I want to take the last couple minutes here to explain what drew you to start OTTO-MATES. What is it? What are you going after? What's the problem? How's it going?
It's going. I'm very grateful for the success we've had in just a few short months. It's been, let's see, just 5.5 months, which is exciting. Five months, but we've grown over 340% already in our memberships, which is awesome. But really, what I wanted to do, you heard me kind of reference it throughout
Yeah.
this episode, but I truly believe that there is something to creating those relationships, but they have to be trusted. I don't believe vendors can create that space because there's always that bias towards wanting to sell something. I want this to be an unbiased space. I want accountants or our members to have access to all of this information. I want them to be able to learn. I want them to be able to create relationships, ask questions of these vendors in a trusted, non-salesy way where, they're not getting in on some weekly email that's going to exhaust them over the next 18 months, and be able to really start to understand what's out there and be able to identify where that solution would work well and help their peers. And so it's peer led, it's about collaboration, it's about trust, it's about bringing everybody to the table so that when those compelling events present themselves, everyone will be able to move forward in a productive way with a lot less wasted time, no wasted conversations, and it's going to be a better experience for everyone, right? Accountants are going to feel heard. They're going to have a say in how all of this works, and they're going to be able to also choose who they want to talk to and who they trust and all of that. And I think vendors then can also understand better what accountants want and need. That's how they're going to be able to present better at the table. They're going to be able to come in and make those conversations more valuable for everybody. And I also think there's one other area where I mentioned as well, because it's such a tight-knit ecosystem of accountants. When something negative gets out there, it can be detrimental because it spreads like wildfire. There's not a lot of opportunity for those vendors to come back and right the wrongs. And I think this is an opportunity to do that, to be able to say like, oh, okay, maybe, I know at one point in time it was like Zora has these diehard reps that go out. This was when I started at Zora in 2018, but they have these diehard reps. They won't leave me alone. They're listening, and that's not their approach anymore, So it's really interesting to see a shift when you have the ability to have these trusted relationships and do it in a way where the compelling event isn't creating this angst amongst everybody. Instead, that compelling event is leading to those very productive conversations.
I'm sure you work with businesses that are like super mature on the automation, AI adoption side, and then others on the other end of the spectrum.
Yep.
What are some of your early learnings there in terms of the right way to approach a bunch of AI automation adoption?
I think it comes back to education, like educate yourself. It's interesting. I've had a number of conversations recently where the back office, accounting, finance, HR, are kind of like lagging in this AI adoption space. Whereas like you see marketing flying because there's content creation and ways that you can create efficiencies there. But there's not as much risk in marketing as there is in finance, like we talked about. There's also just more use cases that present themselves, I think, in what AI is really good for. And I think being able to learn about where those efficiencies can be created on the accounting side and be able to like really figure out what are the use cases and start low. Like I would not suggest going all in and ripping out a system and replacing it with something that is fully AI enabled or run on AI. I think there's something where AI can be a great, not substitute, but addition to your team. I love this agentic AI stuff coming out because it's literally like having a new accountant on your team that you can teach how to do something, but it needs to be taught. It needs to be massaged a little bit, just like a new accountant would need to be trained. It's very similar. So I think if it's starting with baby steps and getting in there, but not being afraid to try things out, because I really think those that are so averse to it are going to fall behind very quickly.
You just have to jump in. I feel the same way in a lot of the go-to-market tech. You're right. It is much lower stakes, but there's a bunch of people that are like, I'll get to that. I'll try that. And if you're not toying around with a lot of this stuff, I think you're going to be in trouble. And you don't have to start with replacing a human or fixing an entire business process. So I couldn't agree more. And I think that's across the board.
Yeah.
And this was awesome. I really appreciate you sharing some of your learnings. And I've had a lot of, more traditional path go-to-market leaders and sales leaders. They have the playbook. They've seen it multiple times. And as I said, to kick this off, I think we're going to see a trend of a lot of folks with deep industry chops leading big organizations, being the most successful enterprise sellers, much like some of the big consulting organizations. Like, I think that's the trend. And I appreciate you sharing your story. It's super inspiring for people that may be thinking about sales and go-to-market and how you can go do that. So wishing you a lot of luck with OTTO-MATES. I appreciate you taking some time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Cracking Outbound. If this was helpful, let us know by messaging me, Todd Busler, on LinkedIn, and share this episode with a friend that you think will be interested. If you want more resources about building and scaling all things outbound, you can sign up for our newsletter at champify.io/blog.